Today we're reading Blood Meridian. See the child. He is pale and thin. He wears a thin and ragged linen shirt. He strokes the scullery fire. Outside lie dark, turned fields with rags of snow, and darker woods beyond that harbor yet a few last wolves. His folk are known for hewers of wood and drawers of water. But in truth his father had been a schoolmaster. He lies in drink. He quotes from poets whose names are now lost. The boy crouches by the fire and watches him. Night of the birth. 33. The Leonids, they were called. God, how the stars did fall. I looked for blackness, holes in the heaven, the deeper stove. The mother dead these 14 years did incubate in her own bosom the creature who would carry her off. The father never speaks her name. The child does not know it. He has a sister in this world that he will not see again. He watches, pale and unwashed. He can neither read nor write, and in him broods already a taste for mindless violence. All history present in that visage, the child, the father of the man. At, at 14 he runs away. He will not see again the freezing kitchen house, in the pre-dawn dark, the firewood, the washpots. He wanders west, as far as Memphis, a solitary migrant upon that flat and pastoral landscape. Black in the fields, blacks in the field, lank and stooped, their fingers spider-like among the balls of cotton. A shadowed agony in the garden, against the sun's declining figures moving in the slower dusk across the paper skyline. A lone dark husbandman pursuing a mule, a herald down the rain-blown bottomland towards night. A year later, he's in St. Louis. He is taken on for New Orleans aboard the flatboat boat. 42 days on the river. At night, the steamboat hoots and trudges past the black waters, alight like cities adrift. They break the floats and sell the lumber, and he walks in the streets and hears tongues he has not heard before. He lives in a room above the courtyard, behind a tavern, and he comes down at night like some fairy book beast to fight with sailors. He is not big, but he has big wrists, big hands. His shoulders are close set. The child's face is curiously untouched behind the scars. The eyes oddly innocent. They fight with fists, with feet, with bottles or knives. All races, all breeds. Men whose speech sounds like the grunting of apes. Men from lands so far and queer that standing over them where they lie bleeding in the mud, he feels mankind itself vindicated. On a certain night, Maltese boatswain shoots him in the back with a small pistol. Swinging to deal with the man, he is shot again just below the heart. The man flees, and he leans against the bar with blood running out of his shirt. The others look away. After a while, he sits on the floor. He lies in a cot in the room upstairs for 2 weeks, while the tavern keeper's wife attends him. She brings him his meals. she carries out his slop, a hard-looking woman, with a weary body like a man's. By the time he is mended, he has no money to pay her, and he lives in the night, and sleeps in the river bank, until he can find a boat that will take him on. The boat is going to Texas. Only now is the child finally divested of all that he has been. His origins are become remote as is his destiny, and not again, in all the world's turning, will there be terrain so wild and barbarous to try, whether the stuff of creation may be shaped to man's will, or whether his own heart is not another kind of clay. The passengers are a different lot. They carry their eyes, and no man asks another, "What is it that brings here?" They cage their eyes, and no man asks another, "What is it that brings him here?" He sleeps on the deck, a pilgrim among others. He watches the dim shore rise and fall, gray seabirds gawking, flights of pelicans coastwise above the gray swells. They disembark aboard a lighter. Settlers of the Chattels, all studying the low coastline, the thin blight of sand and scrub pine swimming in the haze. He walks through the narrow streets of the port. The air smells of salt and new sawn lumber. At night, horses call to him from the dark like souls in want. A week he is on the move again, a few dollars in his purse that he has earned, walking the sand roads of the southern night alone. His hands balled in the cotton pockets of his cheap coat. Earthen, earthen causeways across the marshlands. Egrets in their rookeries, white as candles among the moss. I guess some kind of plant. The wind has a raw edge to it, and the settlements and farms. No, and leaves lope by the roadside and skelter in the night fields. He moves north through a small settlement and farms, working for day wages and found. He sees a parricide hanged in a crossroad hamlet, and the man's friends run towards and pull his leg, and he hangs dead from his rope, while urine darkens his trousers. He works in a sawmill. He works in a diphtheria pest house. He takes as pay from a farmer an aged mule, and I back this animal in the spring of the year 1849. He rides up through the latter-day Republic of Fredonia in the town of Nacogdoches. The Reverend Green had been playing in the full house. The Reverend Green had been playing to a full house daily, as long as the rain had been falling, and the rain had been falling for 2 weeks. The kid ducked into the ratty canvas tent. There was standing room along the walls. There was standing room along the walls, a place or two, and such a heady reek of wet and bathless that they themselves would sally forth into the dark pool now and again for fresh air, before the rain drove them in again. He stood with others of his kind along the back wall. The only thing that might have distinguished him from the crowd was that he was not armed. "Neighbors," said the Reverend, "he couldn't stay out of there of this hell hellholes right here in the Nacogdoches, I said to him. Said, "Mm-mm. Neighbor," said the Reverend, "he couldn't stay out of these here hellholes right here in the Nacogdoches." I said to him, said, "You're going to take the Son of God in there with you?" And he said, "Oh no, no, I ain't." And I said, "Don't you know that he said, I will follow ye always, even unto the end of the road?" Well, he said, "I ain't asking nobody to go nowheres." And I said, "Neighbor, you don't need to ask. He's going to be there with ye every step of the which, whether ye ask it or ye don't." And I said, "Neighbor, you can't get shed of him. Now, are you going to drag him into the hellhole yonder? You ever see such a place for rain?" The kid had been watching the Reverend. He turned to the man who spoke. He wore long mustaches, and teamsters, after the fashion of teamsters, and he wore a wide-brimmed hat with low round crown. He was slightly wall-eyed, and he was watching the kid earnestly, as if he'd know his opinion about the rain. "I just got here," said the kid. "Well, it beats all I ever seen." The kid nodded. An enormous man dressed in an oilcloth slicker had entered the tent and removed his hat. He was bald as a stone, and he had no trace of beard, and he had no brows, his eyes nor lashes to them. No brows to his eyes nor lashes to them. He was close to 7 feet in height, and he stood smoking a cigar, even in this nomadic house of God, and he seemed to have removed his hat only to chase rain from it, and now he put it on again. The Reverend had stopped his sermon altogether. There was no sound in the tent. All watched the man. He adjusted the hat, then pushed his way forward, as far as the crate-box pulpit where the Reverend stood, and there he turned to address the Reverend's congregation. His face was serene and strangely childlike. His hands were small. He held them out. "Ladies and gentlemen, I feel it is my duty to inform you that man holding this revival is an impostor. He holds no papers of divinity from any institution, recognized or improvised. He is altogether devoid of the least qualification to the office he has usurped, and only has committed to memory a few passages from the good book for the purpose of lending his fraudulent sermons some faint flavor of the piety he despises. In truth, that gentleman standing here before you, posing as a minister of the Lord, is not only totally illiterate, but is also wanted by the law in the state of Tennessee, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Arkansas." "Oh God!" cried the Reverend. "Lies! Lies!" He began reading feverishly from his open Bible. "On a variety of charges, the most recent of which involved a girl of 11 years. I said 11. 11! Who had come to him in trust and whom he has surprised in the act of violating while actually clothed in the livery of his God." A moan swept through the crowd. A lady sank to her knees. "This is him!" cried the Reverend, sobbing. "This is him, the devil! Here he stands!" "Let's hang the third!" called an ugly thug from the gallery in the rear. Not 3 weeks before this, he was run out of Fort Smith, Arkansas, for having congress with a goat. "Yes, lady, that is what I said. A goat. Why, damn my eyes if I won't shoot that son of a bitch," said the man rising on the far side of the tent, drawing a pistol from his boot, leveled it, and fired. The young teamster instantly produced a knife from his clothing and unseamed the tent, and stepped outside in the rain. The kid followed. They ducked low and ran across the mud towards the hotel. Already gunfire was general within the tent, and a dozen exits had been hacked through the canvas wall, and people were pouring out. Women screaming, folk stumbling, folk trampled underfoot in the mud. The kid and his friend reached the hotel gallery and wiped the water from their eyes and turned to watch. And they did so. The tent, as they did so, the tent began to sway and buckle like a huge and wounded Medusa, and slowly settled on the ground, trailing tethered canvas walls and ready guy ropes over the ground. The bald-headed man was already at the bar when they entered. On the polished wood before him were two hats, a double handful of coins. He raised his glass, but not to them. They stood up to the bar and ordered whiskeys, and the kid laid his money down, but the barman pushed it back with his thumb and nodded. "This here is on the judge," he said. They drank. The teamster set his glass down and looked at the kid, or he seemed to. He couldn't be sure of his gaze. The kid looked down the bar where the judge stood. The bar was that tall, but not every man. The bar was that tall, not every man could get his elbows on it. But it came just at the judge's waist, and he stood with his hands placed flatwise on the wood, leaning slightly, as if about to give another address. By now, the men were piling through the doorway, bleeding, covered in mud, cursing. They gathered around the judge. A posse was being drawn to pursue the preacher. A posse was being drawn to pursue the preacher. "Judge, how'd you come to have the goods on that no account?" "Goods?" said the judge. When was you in Fort Smith?" "Fort Smith? Where did you know him to all that stuff on him? To know Where did you know him to know all that stuff on him?" "You mean Reverend Green?" "Yes, sir. I reckon you was in Fort Smith before you come out here." I was never in Fort Smith in my life." Doubted he was. They looked from one to another. "Well, where was it you run up on him?" "I never laid eyes on that man before today. Never even heard of him." He raised his glass and drank. There was a strange silence in the room. The men looked like mud effigies. Finally, someone began to laugh, then another. Soon, they were all laughing together. Someone bought the judge a drink. That's it.